My mother disowned me for marrying a black man. 9 years later, she showed up to my kitchen with a list, demanding $925,000. I had a binder waiting for her. She slid it across my kitchen table like it was a bill at a restaurant, not an apology. A list. 5 bullet points. Blue ink. Every single one had a dollar sign in front of it. The paper was folded in thirds, the way she used to fold my school permission slips when I was 8. Efficient, deliberate, closed until the last possible moment. I read it twice without saying a word. Retirement fund, $500,000. College for Paige's son, $200,000. My father's knee surgery, $45,000. Family mortgage balance, $180,000. Monthly support, $3,000 ongoing. Total, $925,000. She hadn't asked how I was doing. She hadn't asked about my children, her grandchildren, who were 4 years old and had never met her. She hadn't said she was sorry, hadn't said she missed me, hadn't said anything that a mother who'd been absent for 9 years might be expected to say. She looked me dead in the eyes over the edge of my kitchen island and said, "This is what families do, Iris." I almost laughed, not because it was funny, because I had spent 9 years waiting for this moment, and now that it was finally here, it looked exactly like I thought it would, and because she didn't know what I had waiting for her. I told her I needed a moment. I walked to my office. She assumed I was composing myself. I wasn't. I went to my desk, pulled open the bottom drawer, reached behind the tax folders, and closed my hand around the spine of a 3-inch navy blue binder. I had labeled it in red pen, dated every item inside it, organized it into 30 tabs. I carried it back to the kitchen and set it on the table next to her list. 2 documents, side by side. Hers, 1 page, 5 bullets, $925,000. Mine, 29 items, 9 years, 3 inches thick. Her eyes went to it like a reflex. Something moved across her face. Not guilt, exactly. More like the recognition of a miscalculation. "What is that?" she asked. "You brought a list, Mom," I said. I sat down. I opened to tab 1. I brought one too. I need to go back 9 years, because the binder doesn't make sense without the context. And the context, once you have it, makes everything else make perfect sense. I was 31 when I married Marcus Webb. He was 33. We'd been together for 4 years, met during a contract software audit I ran for the company where he was lead engineer. He'd caught a billing error I'd missed on a Thursday afternoon, passed me a sticky note about it, and asked me to dinner that Friday. By the time we got married, I knew him better than I'd known anyone. He was methodical and warm. He made spreadsheets for our grocery lists and cried at documentaries about animals. He was patient in a way that didn't feel performed. He was biracial. His mother was black, his father was white, and he was, without any qualification I needed to add, the best person I had ever known. My mother, Diane Colbert, met him once before the wedding. Once. She shook his hand in my parents' living room in Millfield, Ohio, on a Sunday afternoon in March 2014, and then she excused herself to go check on something in the kitchen and never came back out. We waited 20 minutes. My father, Gene, eventually wandered in and found her standing at the sink. He came back and told us she wasn't feeling well. She wasn't sick. I knew it then. I know it now. I told Marcus in the car afterward. He was quiet for a while, then said, "Give her time." That was his answer to a lot of things that year. I gave her time. 5 months of it, right up until our wedding. She didn't come. My father came alone, looking smaller than I'd ever seen him. He danced with me at the reception and didn't mention her once. I didn't ask. I was too busy being happy. Then her letter arrived 8 days after we got back from our honeymoon. Cream-colored stationery, 4 paragraphs, her best cursive. I still have it. It's in the binder. Tab 2. The last line said, "He is not one of us. He never will be." She told me in so many words not to come back, not to call, that I had made my choice and so had she. So I didn't go back. And I didn't call. But I also didn't throw anything away. The first thing she returned was the birthday card I sent her in September 2014, the first birthday after the wedding. I'd chosen it carefully. No message that could be argued with. Just a card with flowers on the front, signed Love, Iris. It came back in the same envelope I'd mailed it in. No note, just the card, resealed, with my address written in her handwriting on the front. I sat with it in my hands for about 10 minutes. Then I got a manila folder, wrote the date on the tab in red pen, put the card inside, and filed it. I don't know why I did that. Some instinct I couldn't have named. Maybe it was the years I'd spent in compliance and audit work, the professional reflex to document everything. Maybe I was already building a case without knowing it. Over the next 9 years, the folder became a binder. There were returned birthday cards, mine to her, cards to my father that she intercepted. There was a birth announcement from 2017 when my twins, Callie and James, were born. I sent it with a photo, a real printed photo, because I thought maybe that would make it harder to return. It came back with the photo inside. The envelope had been opened and resealed with clear tape. Someone had looked at the photo of my 2 newborn children and made the active decision to put it back in the envelope and mail it back to me. That envelope is tab 5 in the binder. You can still see the tape seam. There were text messages I'd screenshotted and printed, because I'd learned that digital records feel less real to people, less indisputable. There were emails. There was a birthday gift package I sent my father in 2019, a leather wallet and a bottle of the bourbon he'd always liked, that came back intact with a post-it note in her handwriting, "Return to sender." 29 items, 9 years, all of them filed, labeled, dated in red pen. I don't say any of this to make myself sound righteous. I had my own failures in those years. I stopped reaching out after 2020. I told myself it it was futility, that the door was closed, and I stopped knocking. I wonder sometimes what would have happened if I'd been more persistent, if I'd shown up in person, if I'd tried differently. But then I look at tab 5 and I remember what happened to the last thing I sent that was unmistakably, undeniably about love. They returned it anyway. Marcus and I built Clarion Compliance Solutions out of a cold garage in Columbus, Ohio in the winter of 2018. That sounds more romantic than it was. The garage wasn't charming. It was 42 degrees most mornings, and we ran a space heater that kept shorting the circuit, so every few hours one of us would trudge to the breaker box in slippers and reset it. We ate a lot of leftover soup reheated in a microwave that was missing its turntable. Marcus built the platform, I built the business model. He understood what the software needed to do. I understood what compliance officers actually needed and were willing to pay for. We were a good team in the garage the same way we were a good team everywhere else. Not because we agreed on everything, but because we trusted each other's expertise enough to stay in our own lanes. We launched in 2019. Small clients first, regional credit unions, and mid-size healthcare practices. By 2020, we had 11 employees and our first enterprise client. By 2022, we had 73 employees and we were being approached by acquisition firms. We didn't sell. We went public instead. On a Tuesday morning in March 2023, Marcus and I rang the opening bell at NASDAQ. Clarion Compliance Solutions, ticker CLRN, market cap at open, $440 million. Our combined 10% founder's stake, on paper, was worth $44 million. I wore a green blazer I'd bought the week before. Marcus cried. I did not, but only barely. My phone started ringing before we got back to the hotel. Area code 740, Millfield, Ohio. My father left a voicemail. His voice sounded different than I remembered it. Older, slower, with a roughness in it that hadn't been there before. He said he'd seen us on the news. He said, "Baby girl, I am so proud of you." His voice cracked on proud. 9 years. Not a single call in 9 years. And now he was proud. My mother sent a text message 72 hours later. 63 words. I counted twice because I wanted to be sure. 0 typos. She'd drafted it clearly. 0 apologies. The operative sentence was, "Life is short. There are things families should share." Then Paige called. Paige is my younger sister by 3 years. She had stayed in Millfield, married her high school boyfriend, had a son named Connor who was now 7. We had exchanged maybe a dozen texts over 9 years, never initiated by her, always in response to something I'd sent for Connor's birthdays or Christmas. She wanted to meet for coffee. We met at a cafe in Columbus that she chose, a place near the short north she'd apparently looked up. She hugged me too long when she came in, held my face in her hands, called me amazing 3 times in the first 5 minutes. Not once, in 2 hours, did she say she was sorry. She asked 32 questions. I know because I started counting around the 15th one, when I realized all of them were pointed in the same direction. Our company, our stake, our house, Marcus's equity, whether we had a financial advisor, what our plans were. None of the questions were "how are you" in any way that meant it. I watched her take a photo of my car in the window reflection when she thought I was looking at my phone. She angled her phone camera at the glass. Our car was parked visible on the street and took 2 shots. I didn't say anything. I filed it. They were building a case for what I owed them, so I let them come. I wanted them to come. Because I had been building something for 9 years, and I needed an occasion to open it. My mother arrived on a Tuesday in May. She took the Greyhound from Columbus to our neighborhood and called a rideshare for the last 2 miles. That detail stayed with me. She could have asked Paige to drive her, but she came alone. Beige cardigan, worn suitcase, pearl studs. She stood in my kitchen, looked around at the house she'd never visited, and read her list out loud like a board presentation. She'd prepared it. She'd formatted it. I let her finish. I didn't interrupt. I didn't react. Then I went to my office and got the binder. Here is what I want you to understand about the escalation that followed in those 9 years, because it wasn't just silence. The silence was the baseline. The escalation was everything that happened during it. The first time I tested the silence was in 2016, about 2 years after the letter. Marcus's company holiday party was in Cincinnati, only 90 minutes from Millfield. I called my father's cell directly, around my mother, and told him we'd be nearby, that we could stop in for an hour. He called me back the next morning, nervous in a way that made my chest hurt. He said it wasn't a good time, that things were complicated, that maybe in the spring. There was no spring visit. What I found out later from my Aunt Ruth Ann, my mother's older sister, who was the one person on that side of the family who never cut me off, was that my mother had put rules in place. My father was not permitted to contact me independently. If a card or package arrived, she handled it. She screened his calls when she could. She'd told him, according to Ruth Ann, that any contact with me was contact with the situation, and the situation had been chosen over family. That was her framing. The situation. As if Marcus was a crisis rather than a person. I want to say I was outraged when I learned this. I was, but I also wasn't surprised. This was consistent with how she'd operated my whole childhood. My father was a good-natured man who had learned over 40 years that peace at home meant agreeing with my mother. He wasn't weak, he was just tired, and she'd used that tiredness for decades. The second escalation came in 2019 when Marcus's mother, Evelyn Webb, was diagnosed with early-stage Alzheimer's. We moved her into a care facility in Columbus, visited every Sunday, and essentially became her primary family that year. It was hard and beautiful in the specific way that caregiving is. Marcus handled it with more grace than I could have managed. At Thanksgiving that year, Paige sent me a group text, herself, my mother, and me, saying she hoped I was well, that they were thinking of me, that family always found its way back. It had the energy of a greeting card, nothing specific, nothing honest. I didn't respond to the group text. I sent Paige a private message. If you want to talk, let's actually talk. She left it on read for 11 days, then replied, Mom is going through a hard time right now, maybe after the holidays. My mother's hard time, as best I could reconstruct it from Ruth Ann's updates, was that my father's hours had been cut at the machine shop where he'd worked for 22 years, and money was getting tight. My parents had not saved well. This was a long-term pattern. They'd always operated on the assumption that things would work out, that there'd be enough. I might have wanted to help with that, if anyone had asked me honestly. If anyone had led with I'm sorry instead of here's what we need. The third escalation happened in 2021. My father had a mild heart episode, not a full cardiac event, but a warning shot. He spent 2 days in the hospital in Millfield. I found out from Ruth Ann, who texted me while she was in the waiting room. I called the hospital directly and asked about his condition. The nurse confirmed he was stable. I didn't hear from my mother or Paige. I thought about driving to Millfield. I sat with my keys in my hand for a while. Then I thought about what that visit would look like. Pulling into that driveway, walking through that door, being in the same room with a woman who had returned photographs of my newborn children. And I put the keys back on the hook. I sent flowers to the hospital, a card with my real phone number on it. The card came back, tucked into the flower wrapping, mailed from a zip code in Millfield. That's tab 19 in the binder. The fourth escalation happened the week after the NASDAQ bell. Before my mother sent her 63-word text, she called my father's phone and told him to reach out to me. He did. His voicemail was genuine. I believe that. I still believe that. But it was also deployed strategically. He was the advanced scout, the warm, cracking voice softening a perimeter. Then came Paige and the coffee. Then came my mother with her list. The fifth escalation happened at the kitchen table, and it was the last one. I had pulled tab 5, the birth announcement with the resealed tape, and set it in front of her. I'd been working through the binder methodically for about 20 minutes. Flat voice, no tears. The way I present quarterly numbers to a board. My mother had graduated from theatrical crying to righteous reframing. You left us, she said. The voice shook in just the right places. You chose him over your own family. I flipped to tab 5, held up the envelope. The tape seemed visible in the fluorescent light of my kitchen. Dad wanted to keep this, I said. You made him send it back. Her jaw locked. Her eyes went to the tape. There was a silence. Then she whispered something. It was quiet enough that I almost missed it, but I've gone back to it many times since, and I'm certain of what she said. If I let it in, I'd have had to admit I was wrong. 1 second. One actual second of something real. Something almost human. Something that sounded like self-knowledge. The specific, terrible kind you can't unknow. Then her chin lifted. Her eyes cleared. But you left us. Gone. I'd found out the week before she arrived. That was what gave me the steadiness to sit at that table and not feel like I was falling. Ruth Ann had called me. My Aunt Ruth Ann, 71 years old, who'd been quietly watching this family for decades, and had reached a point where she was done being quiet. She told me something I hadn't known. In 2019, after my father's hours were cut, my parents had applied for a family loan, a real loan, with paperwork, from a fund my maternal grandmother had set up before she died. The fund was meant for family emergencies, medical, housing, that kind of thing. There were 4 beneficiaries, my mother, Ruth Ann, and 2 cousins. My mother had listed me as a potential resource on the loan application, not as a co-signer, I wasn't asked, but as a family financial asset that could theoretically be accessed to support repayment. She had documented the possibility of my money before she'd ever spoken to me. Ruth Ann had a copy of the application. She emailed it to me. I printed it. It's tab 29 in the binder, my name, listed in a box labeled Other Family Resources. My professional role, my LinkedIn profile, apparently used to establish credibility. The notation: daughter, estranged, high earnings potential, reconciliation being explored. Reconciliation being explored. 2 years before the NASDAQ bell. 2 years before the 63-word text. They had been exploring reconciliation as a financial strategy since 2019. Paige's coffee meeting in March. My mother's Tuesday arrival in May. My father's cracked voicemail. All of it sequenced, all of it coordinated, all of it pointing at the number on the paper she slid across my table. When I understood this, I didn't feel angry in the way I would have expected. I felt something quieter, a kind of sad clarity. The way you feel when a long equation finally resolves. Not happy exactly, just finished. I went to my desk. I printed tab 29. I added it to the binder. Then I waited for Tuesday. Marcus came home while I was still at the table with my mother. The garage door rumbled, his key in the lock, and then he was in the doorway, work bag over one shoulder, still in his coat. He saw the binder. He saw her. He looked at me. He sat down next to me and put his hand on my shoulder. That was it. That was everything. My mother watched this happen. This man that she had called not one of us sat down at the table in the home we'd built together and put his hand on my shoulder, and the gesture was so ordinary, so completely unremarkable in its intimacy, that it said everything the 9 years of fighting never could. She looked at him. She looked at me. I opened to tab 29. I slid it across the table the same way she'd slid her list. This is from 2019, I said. Before any of you reached out. Before the IPO. Before Paige's coffee. Before your text. She looked at the document. I watched her recognize it. Reconciliation being explored, I said. That's your language. She opened her mouth. I don't want an explanation, I said. I want you to understand what I'm about to tell you, and I want you to hear it clearly. She closed her mouth. I will will not give you money. Not because I can't. Not because I'm punishing you. Because the moment I do, you'll tell yourself the silence was just a rough patch, a misunderstanding, a thing that got resolved when the family came back together. I picked up her list. It wasn't a rough patch. I held the paper out to her. It was a choice. You made it. You made it 29 separate times by my count. And the one time you almost didn't, tab 5, the birth announcement, you taped it back shut. She sat very still. You didn't come because you missed me, I said. You came because the numbers changed. Marcus hadn't said a word. He sat with his hand on my shoulder, steady. My mother stood up slowly. She picked up her list from where I'd held it out. She folded it back into thirds. She didn't take tab 29. She walked to the front door. She picked up her worn suitcase. She stopped with her hand on the knob. For a moment, I thought she was going to turn around, say something real, something that would make the 9 years mean something different than they meant. She opened her mouth. She closed it. The door clicked shut behind her. That small, final sound. Marcus exhaled. He didn't say anything for a while. Then he said, "You okay?" I thought about it honestly before I answered. "I think so," I said. "Yeah." Paige called 2 days later. She'd heard from my mother, clearly, and she'd constructed a version of the meeting that positioned me as the aggressor. I was cold. I'd ambushed a vulnerable woman. I'd made a mother feel unwelcome in her daughter's home. I let her say all of it. Then I said, "Did she tell you about tab 29? Silence. "I'll email it to you," I said. She called back 4 hours later. Her voice had a different quality, something flatter. "I didn't know about that," she said. "The loan thing. I didn't know she'd done that." I believed her. Paige was many things, but she wasn't a sophisticated operator. She'd been used too, in a different way. Drafted into a plan she only half understood. "I know," I said. "She told me it was just her exploring options." "It was," I said. "That's exactly what it was." Paige was quiet for a while. "What are you going to do?" "Nothing," I said. "I already did it." My father called on a Thursday. His voice was what it had been in the voicemail. Old, cracked, genuine. He said he was sorry. He didn't qualify it. He didn't add, but to the end. He just said he was sorry and that he'd been a coward and that he didn't have a good explanation for that. I told him I heard him. I told him the door wasn't closed. But I also told him I needed to trust that contact with me was something he could decide for himself without going through her. He said he understood. I don't know yet whether that will be true, but I meant what I said. The door isn't closed for him. Ruth Ann sent me a card with a pressed flower inside. Something from her garden in Millfield. The card said, "You handled it with more grace than I could have. I'm proud of you." I put it on my desk, not in the binder, just on my desk. A few weeks later, I heard from my mother's lawyer, a letter, certified mail, which I found somewhat impressive in its nerve. The letter suggested that my refusal to provide financial support to aging parents was potentially actionable in some vague way that the letter didn't fully specify. Our attorney reviewed it and described it as a demand letter with no legal foundation. We responded briefly and never heard back. That was the last formal move. The binder is still in the bottom drawer of my desk. I haven't touched it since May. I don't know if I'll ever need to open it again, but I know it's there, and knowing it's there is its own kind of peace. The kind that comes from having been careful, from having documented the truth before anyone could revise it. The twins are 5 now, Callie and James. They call Marcus's mother Grandma Evelyn on the days she remembers them, and on the days she doesn't, they sit with her and tell her about their week as if she has asked, because that's what Marcus taught them. My father met them in July, at a park in Columbus, a neutral location he suggested himself. He brought them each a little stuffed animal from a gift shop in Millfield, something he'd clearly spent time choosing. He got on the ground with them without being asked. James let him push him on the swing for 20 minutes straight. I watched my father's face while he did that. He looked like a man who understood, finally and too late, what he had missed. That expression, complicated, private, specific, is not something I could have manufactured. It was the cost of the years, visible on him. I'm not going to pretend it didn't matter. It mattered. It was a loss. Not the money, not the eventual confrontation. The years themselves. The version of a family where my mother had been able to see my husband as a person, where Callie and James had known all 4 of their grandparents, where I had not spent 9 years building a binder instead of building back towards something. That family doesn't exist. I have to be honest about that alongside everything else. What I have is this: a husband who sat down at the table next to me and put his hand on my shoulder, and that was enough. 2 children who are being raised in a house where love is not something you have to earn by compliance. A company we built together in a cold garage with a broken microwave, an aunt who sends pressed flowers, and the knowledge that I documented the truth before anyone could tell me I'd misremembered it. There's a particular thing my mother said that I keep returning to. Not the practice lines, not the "this is what families do." The 1 second of something real. If I let it in, I'd have had to admit I was wrong. I think about that a lot. I think it's actually the most honest thing she's ever said to me, and I think it's the answer to a question I spent 9 years asking without quite knowing it. Not why won't she come around, but what is she protecting herself from? She was protecting herself from the correction, the full weight of what the correction would cost her. The thing about the binder is that I never planned to use it as a weapon. I planned to use it as a record, a proof that I had not imagined the 9 years, that they had happened, item by item, tab by tab, in red pen and clear tape and returned envelopes, that the silence had been deliberate, not passive, that the choices had been made. She brought a list of what she wanted. I had been building a list of what she did, and the difference between those 2 documents, side by side on my kitchen table, was all the evidence anyone needed. I didn't ask for sympathy at that table. I didn't perform grief. I read the items flat, the way I'd present quarterly numbers because the numbers were damning enough without any help from my voice. That's the thing about the truth when you've kept it carefully. You don't have to raise it, you just have to open to tab 1 and let it read itself.